There's a particular kind of cruelty in building your entire life around helping others find peace, only to discover that your own foundation was built on something unspeakable. Most people know Tyler Henry as the boyish, soft-spoken Hollywood medium who made celebrities cry in plush living rooms and sold out theaters across 3 continents. What they don't always see is the fuller picture. A 30-year-old man who has survived brain surgery, a collapsing lung, a family secret ripped straight from a crime thriller, and a body that wages quiet war against him every time he does the thing he was born to do. This is not a tragedy, but it's not an easy story either. On screen, Tyler Henry looks serene. There's a stillness to him, a kind of ethereal calm that makes it easy to believe he exists slightly outside the ordinary rules of the world. What that image doesn't show is what happens behind the camera. The hours spent lying in dark rooms, the cold sweats, the days-long brain fog that descends after an intense reading. Tyler has described the experience of connecting with the other side as plugging into a high-voltage socket. His heart rate spikes. His body temperature swings. His nervous system essentially goes to war with itself on behalf of the people sitting across from him. For most people, that kind of intensity would be an occasional occurrence. For Tyler, it has been his professional life since his late teens. The physical toll started early and hit hard. At just 18 years old, while most of his peers were navigating college orientation weeks and first apartments, Tyler was in an operating room having emergency surgery for a colloid tumor in his brain. These tumors are stubborn, and the recovery is not gentle. To be that young, that newly aware of the magnitude of your own gift, and then to be told that your own brain is the source of immediate danger, that's a particular kind of existential vertigo that most people never have to face. He recovered. He always recovers. But the battles kept coming. In 2020, when the rest of the world was already in free fall, Tyler experienced a spontaneous collapsed lung. No warning, no gradual buildup, just a sudden, terrifying medical emergency that landed him in a hospital bed with a chest tube and the kind of vulnerability that fame cannot protect you from. By the time he reached his late 20s, the word that best described him physically wasn't gifted or extraordinary. It was fragile. Anyone who watched his Netflix series closely could see it. A weariness behind his eyes that went beyond tiredness. This was depletion at a cellular level, the kind that accumulates when you spend your career absorbing other people's grief while your own body is quietly keeping score. Now at 30, Tyler has restructured his entire professional life around the reality of his physical limitations. His current tour, an ambitious run of shows he calls An Evening of Hope and Healing, involves 3-hour performances of extraordinary emotional intensity. To make that sustainable, he has built in what he calls strict rest protocols, sometimes spending 48 full hours after each show in near total silence, allow his nervous system the time it needs to return to baseline. It's a significant trade. Giving hope to thousands of strangers means spending a considerable portion of his own life in carefully managed isolation. At 30, he says he's finally made peace with that exchange. If the health struggles were the only story, Tyler Henry would still be a compelling figure. But in 2022, while filming his Netflix documentary series Life After Death, he opened a door that could not be closed again. He had always felt something shadowed and unresolved on his mother's side of the family. It wasn't anything he could articulate precisely, more of a persistent atmospheric darkness that followed him through childhood holidays and family gatherings. When his mother Teresa agreed to take a DNA test for the documentary, they were both expecting a straightforward confirmation of heritage, perhaps some interesting geographical data, maybe a distant relative or two. What they got instead was the unraveling of an entire identity. The results made something immediately, devastatingly clear. Teresa was not biologically related to the woman who had raised her, a woman named Stella Maria Rose, the grandmother Tyler had known all his life. What followed was weeks of digging through archives, records, and histories that had been deliberately buried. The truth that emerged was almost too dark to process. Stella had kidnapped Teresa as a newborn. She had taken her from a hospital and raised her under a false identity, constructing an entire fictional life history around a stolen child. Teresa had lived her whole life as someone else's daughter, never knowing, never having any reason to question it. And then came the detail that added a dimension of horror to an already devastating story. Stella was a convicted killer. She had been involved in a double homicide and was known to have concealed the bodies of her victims beneath the floorboards of her home. Tyler Henry, the man who built a career and a public identity around helping families find closure, had spent his entire childhood in the orbit of a kidnapper and a murderer. He had celebrated holidays with her. He had sat at her table. And all the while, the dark energy he felt around her, without being able to name it, had been entirely real. The emotional aftermath of this discovery was, by Tyler's own account, soul-crushing. Watching his mother absorb the reality that her entire identity had been a fabrication, that every memory carried the contamination of crime, was its own kind of grief. Teresa had to reckon with biological relatives she had never known existed. People who had spent decades without answers about what happened to a baby who simply disappeared. Tyler didn't just help his mother process this privately. He turned the cameras on it. He brought the world into the investigation, transforming a devastating family secret into a public conversation about resilience, identity, and what we owe each other when the truth is unbearable. To understand how Tyler Henry arrived at 30 carrying this particular combination of gifts and burdens, you have to go back to the very beginning. Not Hollywood, not Netflix. Hanford, California, a small conservative farming town where the supernatural was not a career option and being different was, at best, tolerated. Tyler wasn't the kind of kid who commanded rooms. He was quiet, deeply observant, and afflicted from early childhood with a sensitivity to the emotional lives of everyone around him, including people who weren't in the room at all. The moment that changed everything came when he was 10 years old. He woke in the middle of the night with an unshakable certainty that his grandmother was about to die. Not a fear, not a dream, a knowing. He ran to his mother to tell her. Before he could fully explain himself, the phone rang. The news confirmed exactly what he already knew. In that moment, childhood effectively ended for him. The years that followed were lonely in a way that is difficult to fully communicate. In a town like Hanford, you don't casually mention that you're receiving impressions from people who have died. You learn very quickly to carry that reality privately. Tyler spent his adolescence feeling like a stranger in his own life, bombarded by emotions and presences that had nothing to do with algebra or Friday night football games, serving as an informal counselor to adults in his community while still trying to figure out who he was himself. His parents were loving and supportive, but they were operating without a roadmap. There is no guide for raising a child who exists, at least partially, on the other side of a veil most people never approach. Tyler learned resilience not from any program or philosophy, but from the simple daily necessity of surviving a reality that no one around him fully shared. That early isolation is visible in him still, in the way he protects his privacy, in the careful guardedness beneath the warmth. Los Angeles could have destroyed him. It has destroyed people with far less unusual gifts and far more conventional armoring. Instead, Tyler arrived as a teenager and found, perhaps the first time, that the world he lived in had a place for him. It started with a reading for actress Sarah Paulson. Word traveled through Hollywood at speed, when the show Hollywood Medium premiered on E! In 2016, the skepticism was loud and immediate, cold reader, fraud, elaborate performance. And then the footage started speaking for itself. The reading that became impossible to dismiss involved actor Alan Thicke. Tyler, during their session, flagged concerns about Thicke's heart. Months later, Thicke died from a ruptured aorta. That kind of moment, specific, documented, time-stamped, has a way of quieting certain arguments. By his early 20s, Tyler had constructed something genuinely rare, a sustainable career built entirely on a gift that most of the world officially doesn't believe in, a New York Times best-selling book, a waiting list for private readings that stretched into the thousands, a net worth that had climbed past $3 million. And then, with Life After Death on Netflix, a pivot away from the polished celebrity format into something raw, more personal, and ultimately more honest. Success in Tyler's particular industry comes with an unusual social cost. Everyone wants access to his gift. The actual person underneath it can become almost incidental. Against that backdrop, the relationship he has maintained with Clint Godwin since 2016 is quietly remarkable. They met, fittingly, through a reading. Clint's mother had reached out to Tyler following the death of her father. Something between Tyler